Hey, Mark, you turn me up.
They teach his life in one big chunk, right? Just surveyor, astronomer, mathematician. His father, Robert, because he could cultivate tobacco, he was able to cultivate 7,000 pounds of tobacco. With that, he bought 100 acres of land. He put his 6-year-old son's name on that land deed. That is what made Benjamin Banneker free. So we know that Benjamin and his parents' cabin were in this space, which means that if they were in this space, everywhere we walk, he walked. So this is the replica cabin. We actually use it. This would be, very close to what, how he would have lived. This right here, we actually have a root cellar. It is used. We have a couple of volunteers that come in and they put on cooking demonstrations called Cooking in the Cabin. We are unique because this is a living history museum and park. For me, I feel super lucky that this is my office, right? And I want more people to come in and enjoy this, experience this.
Welcome back to another episode of Vestiges. We're sitting in front of Benjamin Banneker's cabin here at the Benjamin Banneker Park and Museum in Catonsville, Maryland.
You know, so much of my research is centered in Baltimore City and the antebellum period. I rarely engage with colonial history, at all, but specifically colonial history of Maryland. And Maryland has a very unique history relative to the other 13 colonies. The only Catholic colony, right? The only Catholic colony founded to be some type of religious, haven for English who were trying to come to North America. And it's a lot of interesting things that's happening as far as, what's going on with this institution of enslavement that is rooted in the foundation of this country and in Maryland, and the people who live on the fringes of that, right? Mm-hmm. Like Benjamin Banneker. Mm-hmm. I think one of the most interesting components of Benjamin Banneker's story is that he's born free, mm-hmm. but he's not very far removed from enslavement. His maternal lineage mm-hmm. is white indentured women, and his paternal lineage, Senegalese, mm-hmm. African enslaved people. As I study Baltimore in the mid-19th century, at the height of enslavement, right before the Civil War, freedom and enslavement looks a lot the same. They're doing a lot of the same labor in Baltimore. They're occupying a lot of the same living spaces, and they have a similar social status to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
Black people are free, but free to do what? They can't own land, they can't vote, they can't, enjoy any of the benefits of citizenship. They're just not owned by anybody. Which I don't want to downplay. Like that's big enough in itself, right? But there's limitations to this freedom, and that's even in the antebellum period. So to have a guy like Benjamin Banneker, who's not only free, right, but is able to engage with astronomy and be commissioned to do work by one of the founding fathers, and surveying land for the nation's capital, right? This is a very interesting story.
The fact that we're at the 250th founding of the nation, right? And in these moments of like almost brazen nationalism of how great America is, et cetera, the contradictions also become stark as well when we're looking at the nation. But these contradictions are apparent in the colonial period, that before there is a United States, right? These 13 separate colonies. And Benjamin Banneker's life is really the result of some of the contradictions that we know today. So he's has European ancestry, right, which contributes to his experience. So you have his mother, who's an indentured servant, or his grandmother, that's an indentured servant.
His mother's well.
Yeah, so they're indentured servants. And like you were saying, indentured servitude, enslaved Africans, their condition, as far as the law goes, is different. However, their lived experiences are not much different for each other. So it allows for this in this colony where labor is the demanding force. A lot of their lived experience as far as work is very similar, and they have a lot of this cross-racial, cross-ethnic contact, and which allows in any situation for friendships to evolve, romantic relationships to evolve,
yes,
et cetera, et cetera. And in my own research, very broadly, I look at interracial working class solidarity. And my main thing is that shared material conditions and these integrated workplaces is what allows for Black workers and white workers to see their similar condition and their common enemy and organize around that. And I think in this period, it's a lot of that same cross-racial contact because of lived conditions, working conditions, which becomes a problem in the colonial space, right?
1,000%.
Because I think of Bacon's Rebellion, that people may be familiar with from like middle school, high school history classes, but Bacon's Rebellion was such an issue in this colonial period because it was, poor whites, enslaved Africans, indentured servants, all coming together to, I won't use the word overthrow, but essentially to change their conditions. They saw an elite group that had a particular life, and they had something different. But how this relates to Benjamin Banneker is that within this contradiction, his life is possible, where we know as whites and Blacks over time are pulled further and further apart because their unity causes an issue for those in power, right? But Benjamin Banneker's life sits like at the intersection of that contradiction, and he's born free and essentially owns land and is able to engage with the land, the stars, if you will, with astronomy, with just his intellectual capabilities different than people in other places at this time. And I think that what I take away from here is that his lived experiences and also being in this particular place in Maryland, where this is a Catholic colony and they have a different, I guess, strategy or even ethos around slavery and enslaved Africans, like is where his life is possible. And it's really not, it's an exception to the rule, essentially, which makes his life so great. But then as he grows up and is in this place, like, he's still engaging with slavery.
1,000%. you hit on a lot of things. There's a lot of things that's happening, specifically in the context of Maryland. You have the Maryland Act of 1664,
Mm-hmm.
which targets the situation that brings Banneker into existence,
Yeah.
which is the marriage of indentured white women and enslaved African men, right? And anything you know about a law, people make a law to address something that's already happened,
Yeah, exactly.
right? So how prevalent are these interactions between these two groups of people that the colony seeks to address it this way?
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think about what you're saying and what your boy Seth Rockman is referring to, again, in the antebellum period with Scraping By, his book Scraping By, and he talk about these interracial work sites. And it's not necessarily a place of interracial solidarity, it's a place of exploitation, right? Where these wages are being competed against the people based on what their class and their status is, right? And like you said, back in the colonial period, you have examples of people recognizing that and acting on that with Bacon's Rebellion. I feel like what has been deemed as miscegenation and all of these other negative connotations to it, it's the same strategy, right? I'm an indentured, right? Yeah. And this person is with me all the time, and I see a connection in this person, and it's happening enough for somebody to say, "Yo, we need to make a law stopping this because this could be a problem."
Exactly.
Right. It also makes me think about the phenotypes of the free black population. Like, I remember growing up, knowing about Frederick Douglass, being a Baltimore guy, and hearing about Frederick Douglass. I don't know if it wasn't until later in the grad program that I realized that Frederick Douglass was a light-skinned brother. It wasn't something that was really talked about.
Yeah.
And he ain't even no free black.
Right.
Right. But what's giving him the advantage to be in these positions next to these abolitionists, and why they take him on, and why this is the guy that they want to get behind? And he was educated. How much is his complexion, attributing to his proximity to the people who's going to teach him to read? Right. He's not in the. I don't know, but when I think about these free populations that develop in the African diaspora in Latin America or in the Caribbean, or a lot of these places are Catholic, right? And we know about the difference as far as tolerance for most Protestant, English enslavers, versus we see large populations being manumitted across the diaspora where they engage with Catholic enslavers. I don't know if that has a direct correlation with Maryland, but there will be a time after Benjamin Banneker, there'll be a large rate of manumissions in Maryland, right? So it made me think about when you were talking about the colonial period and Catholicism. Speaking on, like you said, the working conditions, because it's still a labor story, right? And the interracial solidarity, or what seems like, some recognition and shared experience. Him getting commissioned by Thomas Jefferson, and knowing what we now know about Thomas Jefferson's relationship with his enslaved woman, Sally Hemings, right? Right. It makes me wonder what Benjamin Banneker was in proximity to. Yeah. You know what I mean? When they asking him to come out here to what will be DC, because like, to think about what Maryland is in the colonial period, right? Baltimore town is only founded 3 years before Banneker's born. Yeah. Right? It doesn't even become an independent city until almost a century later, over a century later. Right? And it'd be very rural. It wouldn't have been this boomtown industrial type Maryland with the railroads that it would later be, and to think about Banneker being in DC, right? Upon the request of, Thomas Jefferson, not him specifically, the story that Aleem was telling us about Andrew Ellicott, and him being commissioned. He said, "Hey, I know a guy in Maryland. He get you right. He just happened to be he had a tan." So that's how you get to DC. Yeah. But the sources tell us that when Thomas Jefferson went to Philadelphia, even though it was free territory, he would still be bringing Sally Hemings up there, rotating the outposts.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, he's over in France and in Paris with Sally Hemings, right? I wonder if you know Benjamin Banneker might have seen Thomas Jefferson.
But that's what I mean by these contradictions that exist, because you have Thomas Jefferson, who is knows from Virginia,
Gotcha.
and now he's talking about Africans, Black people, and he has this relationship with Sally Hemings, and then you have Benjamin Banneker, who is brilliant,
And you're
serving
paying
in
him.
DC, and you're paying him
Exactly.
for this job. So it's like, and then Benjamin Banneker writes this letter to Thomas Jefferson, talking about how the contradictions of the Declaration of Independence and how Black people are actually treated in the country as enslaved people. So again, like you're saying, you wonder what he would see. Is that I think he was very aware of the contradictions of the period, particularly as it pertained to race, because it's almost as well like if you believe Black people are, intellectually inept, or socially inept or whatever, it's like, how do you also explain me, right? Into astronomy, I'm surveying DC, and it's definitely, again, like these contradictions that are glaring, and he would have grown up with European ancestry that may have contributed to the fact that he is free, obviously, but also his engagement with Quakers who are white and who are, I think, the same family is who's giving him materials to actually do the work that he wants to do. It may also contribute to how they engage with him as well, because of his proximity to whiteness. And some of these terms are anachronistic, like how we see white now is not the same as white then, but it's still these stark differences where we can even look at it as just color, these gradations of color, and it's like the closer you are to white, you have more privilege.
I like that you making it clear to the people viewing who might not engage with the discipline like that whiteness isn't a term that always existed, right? Whiteness is a concept that comes later. These people would have, saw saw themselves as English or Spanish, right? America is the first group of disbanded Europeans to break away and make their own nation. Right? So at this time, it's not even a thing. So I know he knows that he is descendant of people who are enslaved.
Yeah.
Right? I know he's aware of that. And he's also aware of the contradictions of that Declaration of Independence. Right? And that's one of the things he's addressing in the letter with Thomas Jefferson. There's so many things that we can build on with Banneker. Another interesting thing about it is because he's from the colonial period, right? Because his work is done in such isolation, we have so few primary sources about him, except these accounts of him by people like Thomas Jefferson, who their status allows them to live on in the archive in a way that he doesn't, right? But how ironic is it that the day this man died, this is how the legend goes, that the day this man's body being put into the ground, his cabin with all his things in it is burnt up, right? And I'm not one to get into conspiracy theories, you know what I mean? But later in the African American experience, we find guys like Benjamin Banneker, and he's used by abolitionists as examples of somebody who is not inferior because of their race and is capable of doing anything that any European man can do. And that's some dangerous stuff. People know this, right? I'm thinking it is very coincidental. That man stuff burn up like that, Also, to the brothers that don't have no kids or no wife, there's something to that. It was an earlier episode we did, Black History Month. We was talking about Carter G. Woodson, a guy who, we don't know to have any children or, didn't take a wife, committed to his studies. And you got Benjamin Banneker, a very similar situation. You know what I mean? Like, Not to say that that's the only way that you can become proficient at what you're doing, but it's just some interesting parallels between some of these people, like what they're doing and their commitment to what they're doing. I could think about how dangerous it would be if everybody knew about this black man who played this role in the founding of the nation's capital, who challenged, one of our founding fathers on his ideologies about race and the institution of slavery. And a lot of people will talk about how the legend of Banneker has built, and there's really a thin line between the mythology and the historical accuracy. But the Library of Congress got the letter and the reply with Thomas Jefferson. So we know this guy was real. We know he existed in some capacity. And it's important for people to know that even in the colonial period, when that's not what we're associating people doing, especially not black people, if we can use that anachronistically, right? One thing I find most compelling about a guy like Benjamin Banneker is how few people know who he is and his significance, yet his name is on things all over the state. Like when I'm on the way here, trying to get here, you put in the GPS and you say, do you want to go to the Banneker Rec Center, or you trying to go to the, the Banneker Park here, or you trying to go to the Banneker building on Morgan State campus, And it's like, to go back to one of our previous episodes, Carter G. Woodson, when he started Negro History Week that became Black History Month, the intent was not to celebrate these great men, but for Black people to engage with their history, right? So maybe it's a Benjamin Banneker middle school or Benjamin Banneker Park in your city, in your neighborhood, or you heard of people like Benjamin Banneker or a name of somebody that we haven't discussed today on this episode. Don't take no time to just run it through a Google, find out who this person is, why a person was important enough to have their name bestowed on whatever place you visited, right?
I'll also add to that, is that in our conversations, just generally, we talk about what school or the education system has failed to taught us, right? And I think, to your point, if you see like a Benjamin Banneker elementary school or something of the sort with someone's name, it's like we have to move past the point of school didn't teach me that. And it's like, okay, well then how are you going to teach yourself? Especially when society kind of paints learning as a thing that only happens in the schoolhouse. When you only attach your learning to the schoolhouse, you essentially have nothing else to learn for the rest of your life. But and then you also are subject to, as we talked about in our education episode, you're subject to the education system that teaches you your inferiority in a lot of ways, right? So again, to your point, where it's like we have many computers in our hand where you can see a building or see a statue of someone and you can just look it up and be able to now engage in your own line of thinking and pass it on. Like there's vulnerability in learning that I think people are really scared to hop into, when it's like, oh, I'm so and so age and I never knew about this. It's like it don't matter if you're alive, you're learning. So I like the point that you make of, and you said that in the Black History episode too, just look these people up. Why are they famous? When did they become famous? Even to your point of Benjamin Banneker, because I asked Aleem, like, when was he a popular guy when he died? Like what made him like this figure like this? And to learn that abolitionists, in arguing their case for Black folks or enslaved Africans, right? Benjamin Banneker was that exception. And to learn about these people is to celebrate them, but also is to it's like Sankofa, see where we were, see what we've done, and it helps us get to where we're going.
Beautiful. Can't rely on an institution for education, and we can't limit learning to the classroom, right? You were saying some heavy things right there. But as I'm looking at that nice sweatshirt you got on, we go to a HBCU, and this man is did in 1806, he didn't even know HBCU.
Right.
You dig what I'm saying? This man didn't go to any institution of learning.
Yeah.
He was self-taught.
Right, exactly. That's a great point.
You know? So let Benjamin Banneker be an
Mhm.
example of who we can all be. This has been another episode of Vestiges of Slavery. I hope you enjoyed. See you next time.
Hey, Mark, you turn me up.